The little restaurant was quiet for a Thursday evening. It had the warmth of old wooden furniture, soft lights hanging from the ceiling, and a small piano in the corner that usually played gentle music in the background. The owner, a kind man in his 50s, moved between tables, wiping glasses and greeting regular customers. Most nights, the piano was played by a young woman who had been working there for years, filling the air with simple, cheerful melodies that made people feel at home. That evening, however, something unusual happened. The door opened and a young man stepped in. He was well dressed, but there was nothing flashy about him. His shoes were slightly worn and his coat looked a little too big, as if it belonged to someone else once. He walked slowly to the counter, his eyes scanning the room with a mixture of curiosity and nervousness. The owner noticed him immediately. He seemed polite and quiet, not the type to cause trouble. The young man approached and spoke softly. "Excuse me, sir, may I do something unusual tonight? I have a request that might sound strange, but I promise it is harmless. I would like to play the piano in exchange for a meal." The owner blinked, surprised. People sometimes asked for free things in the restaurant, but this was a first. He studied the young man, trying to read his intentions. There was a calm confidence in the way he held himself, yet he didn't seem demanding or pushy. The owner smiled, shrugging gently. "Well, that is unusual, but all right. If you can play the piano, I will let you do it, just for tonight." The young man's eyes lit up. "Thank you, sir. I appreciate it more than you know." He walked over to the piano, his steps careful, almost reverent. He sat down, brushing his fingers lightly over the keys as if he were greeting old friends. The room watched quietly. Some diners returned to their meals, curious but cautious, while others leaned forward to see what would happen. There was an expectant hush that settled over the space. He began to play softly at first, almost a whisper of sound. The notes were delicate, careful, like a stream trickling over rocks. Slowly, the music grew richer, fuller. It wasn't flashy or dramatic, but it had a quality that made people stop talking and listen. The melody was gentle and sad, but there was something hopeful woven into it. It felt like it told a story without words, a story that belonged to everyone and no one at the same time. The owner walked past the tables, noticing the diners' faces. Some were smiling softly, lost in thought. Others had their forks paused mid-air, eyes wide, completely absorbed. The young man played with ease, but it was clear that every note was deliberate, every pause intentional. The room seemed to shrink around him, focusing entirely on the piano and the story it told. After a few minutes, a small group of customers at one table exchanged whispers. "Who is he?" one asked. "He plays like a professional," said another. "He doesn't even look like someone who performs publicly." Their curiosity grew with every note. There was something about the young man that didn't fit the usual patterns of the world. He was ordinary in appearance, but extraordinary in skill. It was a mystery that drew attention silently. As he played, he occasionally glanced up at the diners, not in arrogance, but almost shyly, as if seeking approval or connection. His eyes were gentle and his presence was calming. People felt a strange comfort, as though they were in the company of someone who had a quiet wisdom about life. It was the kind of feeling that made people stop worrying about the little problems they carried, even if just for a moment. Meanwhile, the owner watched from behind the counter, impressed but also cautious. He had seen many young people play piano before, but something about this young man was different. There was an energy in the way he moved his fingers, a clarity in the way he listened to each note before continuing. It wasn't just skill, it was understanding. And yet, he hadn't even mentioned his background or where he had learned to play. As the music continued, the young man's expression changed subtly. There was a flash of emotion, something personal that made the melody shift slightly. It became more intense, almost like a conversation between him and the piano. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the music carry him. And for the diners, it felt like a window into someone's life story, even though no words were spoken. Some patrons couldn't help themselves. A few whispered to their friends, speculating about him. "Do you think he is a student?" one asked. "Maybe he grew up playing piano," another suggested. No one could be sure. Everyone agreed, however, that there was something rare and captivating about his playing. It wasn't just background music anymore. It was the heart of the restaurant. When he paused briefly to take a breath, the silence that followed was filled with anticipation. People were waiting for the next note, the next phrase as if the music itself had become part of their evening. Even the staff had stopped moving, drawn into the moment, watching and listening. He smiled faintly, almost apologetically, as if he didn't want to disturb the peaceful atmosphere but couldn't help himself. Then he played again, this time a slightly faster piece. The notes danced lightly, creating a feeling of hope and joy. It was like a conversation, a dialogue with everyone in the room. The mood shifted, lifting slightly, and the diners felt a sense of wonder that was hard to describe. Throughout the performance, the young man never demanded attention. He didn't look for praise or admiration. His focus was entirely on the piano and the music. And yet, in giving everything to the music, he gave something to everyone around him. There was a connection forming, subtle but undeniable, as if each note carried a piece of himself to the listeners. The owner, observing all of this, felt a mix of admiration and curiosity. He approached quietly and asked, "You play very well. How did you learn?" The young man paused, fingers hovering above the keys, and looked up. "I've had a teacher before, but mostly I learned by listening and practicing. Music has been part of my life for as long as I can remember. It's my way of speaking when words aren't enough." His voice was soft but sincere. This simple answer made people even more intrigued. They realized he wasn't performing for attention or reward. He played because it was part of who he was. There was honesty in that, and it resonated deeply with everyone present. As the evening went on, the music shifted from gentle and soft to more expressive, with subtle highs and lows that kept the listeners engaged. Every person in the restaurant seemed caught in the spell, forgetting the outside world for a little while. The young man's performance had turned an ordinary evening into something memorable, something that would be remembered long after the meal was finished. And yet, even as the night grew darker outside, there was a feeling that this was just the beginning of a story. The young man's presence, quiet and unassuming, had brought a sense of mystery and beauty to a simple restaurant. No one could guess the truth behind the man at the piano, but they all felt it, something important, something human, something unforgettable. When he finally stopped playing, there was a moment of silence, heavy and filled with emotion. People didn't immediately know how to react. They were stunned, not just by the music, but by the person who had created it. The young man stood, nodded politely to the owner, and said, "Thank you for letting me play. I hope it was not a disturbance." The owner smiled, shaking his head. "It was a gift. Thank you for sharing it." As he walked toward the door, the diners exchanged looks of amazement. They had witnessed something rare, something that felt real and meaningful. The young man disappeared into the night, leaving behind a room full of people who were quietly reflecting on what they had just experienced. And though the evening continued, the music lingered in their hearts, a gentle reminder that extraordinary moments could arrive in the most ordinary places. After that evening, the restaurant felt different. People kept talking about the young man who had played the piano, and some even returned the next day hoping to catch another performance. The owner couldn't stop thinking about him either. He had seen many musicians come and go, but there was something unusual about this young man. Not just his skill, but the way he made everyone feel connected through music. The next evening, the restaurant was busier than usual. There were the regular customers, people who had heard the story from friends, and a few curious newcomers who wanted to see the pianist for themselves. The owner was preparing the restaurant, making sure everything was ready. The smell of fresh bread and warm soup filled the air. Soft lamps cast a golden glow over the tables, and the piano in the corner stood quietly, waiting for someone to awaken it. As if on cue, the young man returned. He walked through the door without fanfare, carrying nothing but a small bag slung over his shoulder. His coat looked a little lighter this time, and his shoes were the same, worn but clean. He smiled faintly at the owner and nodded in greeting. "Welcome back," the owner said warmly. "Would you like to play again tonight?" The young man nodded, setting his bag down carefully. "If that's all right, sir. I would like to play again." Curious eyes followed him to the piano. Some people whispered among themselves. "Is it the same person?" one asked. "He must be extraordinary," another replied. Everyone felt a mixture of excitement and wonder. No one knew much about him, yet there was a sense that this evening would be special again. He sat at the piano, his fingers hovering over the keys as if greeting an old friend. He started slowly, gently, letting the notes fall naturally, creating a soft melody that filled the room. Unlike the previous night, there was a calm familiarity about his playing, as if he knew he had an audience waiting to feel something with him. The diners leaned back, listening closely, drawn into the music in a way that felt personal. He moved through the notes carefully, yet with confidence. Each phrase of the melody seemed to carry a different emotion. Sometimes it was joyful, sometimes sad, but always honest. The music flowed like a conversation, and even without words, the diners felt like they were part of it. Some closed their eyes, letting the sound wash over them. Others watched his hands moving gracefully, wondering how someone could make such simple keys produce such beauty. As he played, the young man's eyes occasionally swept across the room. He noticed a small child staring, mesmerized by the piano. He nodded slightly in acknowledgement, then returned his attention to the keys. Across the room, a couple held hands, their eyes glistening, silently moved by the melody. There was a sense of connection forming in the restaurant, a shared experience that tied everyone together. The owner, standing near the counter, watched quietly. He was impressed by more than just the playing. The young man had a way of making everyone feel comfortable, as though the music belonged to them as well. It wasn't about showing off talent. It was about sharing something meaningful. The owner whispered to a waitress, "There's something different about him. I don't know what it is, but he isn't just a regular musician." Throughout the evening, subtle moments revealed more about the young man's personality. Between songs, he spoke softly with a few diners, asking about their day or sharing a quiet smile. No one knew much about him, but his presence felt warm and genuine. He never asked for compliments or attention. Everything he did seemed natural, unforced, and deeply human. A few guests tried to ask questions about his background, curious to understand who he was. "Where did you learn to play like that?" one asked. He simply smiled and replied, "I learned over time with patience and practice. Music has always been a part of me." His answer was brief, almost mysterious, but it didn't feel like he was hiding anything. Instead, it was as if he wanted people to focus on the music, not his story. As the night went on, he gradually moved to more complex pieces. The music became lively, energetic, and full of motion. Some diners tapped their feet unconsciously. Others nodded to the rhythm. Even those who didn't usually pay attention to music found themselves drawn in. The young man's fingers danced over the keys effortlessly, creating a performance that felt alive and spontaneous. During a pause between pieces, he spoke quietly to the owner. "Do you mind if I stay for a little while after the performance? I would like to talk to a few people if that is all right." The owner nodded, curious. "Of course. You're welcome here as long as you like." This small request only deepened the intrigue. Diners whispered among themselves, wondering what he might say. There was a sense that the young man had something important to share, though no one could guess what it might be. The music had already created a bond, and now his words might reveal another layer of his character. He continued playing, the music gradually slowing down, becoming more reflective. There were soft pauses, gentle movements, and a quiet intensity that held everyone's attention. Each note seemed to express emotion without needing explanation. The diners felt they were glimpsing something personal, a story told through sound rather than speech. A few regulars approached him cautiously, asking about his life and experiences. He spoke humbly, sharing small anecdotes without revealing too much. "I have played in many places," he said, "but I enjoy moments like this the most, where people listen not because they have to, but because they want to." There was a sincerity in his voice that resonated deeply. People didn't feel like they were just watching a performer. They felt like they were part of something meaningful. As the evening drew to a close, he finished with a soft, lingering melody. The notes hung in the air, delicate and emotional. There was a moment of silence, a pause that felt like holding one's breath before the diners erupted in applause. The young man smiled faintly, acknowledging their appreciation without arrogance. He had given them a gift, not seeking anything in return. Afterwards, he walked slowly among the tables, speaking quietly with those who wished to talk. Some shared their thoughts on the music, others simply thanked him for the experience. Everyone left with a sense of warmth, inspiration, and quiet awe. The young man had a way of making people feel seen, even if they didn't know him. His presence left a lasting impression, and the conversations continued long after he had left. The owner helped him gather his things as he prepared to leave. "You have a rare gift," he said sincerely. "Thank you for sharing it with us." The young man nodded, his eyes calm and thoughtful. "Thank you for allowing me to share it. I hope the music brought some happiness tonight." Then, without further fanfare, he stepped out into the night, leaving the restaurant filled with quiet excitement and stories that would be retold many times. Even after he left, the music lingered in the minds of the diners. People talked about the performance, replaying the melodies in their heads. Some left feeling inspired, others moved to tears. Everyone agreed that they had experienced something extraordinary, a moment of pure connection that was rare in everyday life. That night, the owner locked up the restaurant with a smile, reflecting on the young man's visit. He knew he had witnessed someone remarkable, not just for talent but for the way he touched hearts. The restaurant had become more than a place to eat. It had become a place where strangers connected through music, a space that held the memory of a quiet, unassuming young man who had brought beauty into their lives without asking for anything in return. The next day, the young man did not appear immediately. The restaurant felt quieter than usual, as if everyone was waiting for him to return. The owner kept glancing at the door, wondering if he would walk in again. Customers who had come in the previous night were still talking about the performance, replaying the music in their minds. Everyone agreed that it had been something special, something that stayed with them long after the notes had faded. When the young man finally arrived, he did not come alone. A small notebook was tucked under his arm, and there was a careful determination in his step. He greeted the owner with a quiet nod and asked, "May I play again tonight?" The owner smiled warmly. "Of course. Everyone is talking about you. I think it is good for the restaurant tonight." The young man thanked him softly and moved toward the piano. Patrons whispered to one another, curious and excited. There was a sense of anticipation in the room, a feeling that something more was about to unfold. He sat down at the piano and began with a soft tune, familiar to anyone who had heard him before, but now it felt different. There was an intensity in his playing, a subtle urgency that seemed to carry a hidden story. The notes were delicate yet purposeful, and the diners listened intently, sensing that the music was more than just melody. It was emotion, expression, and perhaps a hint of the life he had lived. As he played, a few clues about him began to emerge. The way he paused between certain notes, the careful selection of each melody, hinted at experiences beyond the ordinary. It was as if he was trying to communicate without words, letting the music tell his story. Some diners leaned closer, their curiosity growing. Who is this young man really? Where did he come from, and why was he here in this small restaurant playing for a meal? A waitress who had been there for years whispered to the owner, "He is different. I can feel it in the way he plays. It's not just talent. It is life itself that he is putting into it." The owner nodded in agreement, unable to take his eyes off the young man. There was a depth in the music, a layer of experience that could not be learned from books or practice alone. Throughout the evening, the young man moved seamlessly between soft, reflective pieces and lively, upbeat tunes. Each transition seemed to tell a chapter of his life. The diners began to notice small signs as well. The worn edges of his notebook, the way he sometimes stared into the distance, lost in thought before returning to the keys. These little details created a sense of mystery and connection at the same time. Everyone felt like they were slowly discovering a secret about him, a secret hidden behind the music. Some guests started to ask questions, carefully, politely. "Have you performed for many people before?" one asked. He paused briefly, then said, "I have performed in many places, but there are moments like this that are most memorable. Here people listen with their hearts, not just their ears." His answer was gentle and humble, yet it added to the growing curiosity in the room. No one could tell his full story, but they sensed that it was extraordinary. As the night progressed, the young man's performance became more expressive. There were sudden changes in tempo, shifts in emotion, and subtle nuances that hinted at experiences of joy, loss, and hope. The diners watched and listened, some moved to tears, others simply silent in admiration. Even the regulars, who thought they had seen everything, were captivated by the depth of feeling in his music. During a brief pause, the young man spoke quietly with the owner. "May I share something after I finish the next piece?" The owner nodded, intrigued. "Of course. I think everyone will be interested to hear it." Patrons whispered to one another, sensing that something important was about to be revealed. The anticipation in the room was tangible, a quiet tension that made the evening feel more alive. He began to play again, this time a piece that was slower, more contemplative. The melody was rich with emotion, a story unfolding with every note. As he played, he seemed to open a small window into his life, revealing feelings and experiences without saying a single word. The diners felt privileged to witness it, as if they had been granted a rare glimpse into someone else's world. The young man paused briefly and looked around the room. His eyes met those of the diners, conveying something unspoken. There was a sincerity in his gaze, a depth of understanding, and a quiet invitation to connect. People felt the music not just with their ears, but with their hearts. The room became a shared space of emotion and understanding, a place where strangers could feel a bond through something as simple and profound as music. He continued playing, the intensity of the music growing. It was not chaotic or loud, but powerful in a way that drew everyone in. Patrons leaned forward, some holding their hands together, some closing their eyes, all absorbed in the story unfolding through sound. The young man's presence was magnetic, not because he demanded attention, but because he shared so much of himself without saying a word. As the evening neared its end, he concluded with a gentle, lingering melody. The notes hung in the air like a soft echo, fading slowly but leaving a deep impression. There was a moment of silence, a pause where everyone absorbed the experience, before the room erupted in applause. The young man smiled faintly, nodding to the diners, acknowledging their appreciation without pride or arrogance. After he played, he spoke softly, sharing small insights about the music and the emotions behind it. "Music has always been a way for me to understand the world and myself," he said. "It is not just about notes and keys. It is about feeling, connection, and honesty." Patrons listened quietly, sensing the truth in his words. He did not speak of fame or achievements, only of the importance of sharing and connecting through music. Several guests approached him to talk further. Some asked questions, others simply thanked him. The young man listened patiently, responding with warmth and humility. There was no pretense, no attempt to impress. He simply shared what he could, letting the music and his words create an experience that felt genuine and human. As the night ended, the owner helped him gather his things. "You have a rare gift," he said sincerely, "not just in music, but in the way you touch people's hearts." The young man nodded, his eyes calm and thoughtful. "Thank you. It is not about the music alone, but about the people who listen. Tonight everyone has shared something with me and I am grateful." He walked to the door and stepped out into the cool night, leaving the restaurant full of quiet reflection. The diners lingered for a while, replaying the music in their minds, sharing their thoughts with each other. Conversations were full of emotion, admiration, and wonder. People who had only come for a meal left feeling inspired, moved, and connected. The young man had brought more than music. He had brought a sense of humanity, of empathy, and of understanding that stayed with everyone long after he was gone. The owner locked up the restaurant later, reflecting on the events. He knew that this young man was extraordinary, not just for his talent, but for the way he touched lives through something so simple and pure. The restaurant had become more than a place to eat. It was a place where strangers could experience beauty, emotion, and connection. And all of it had come from a quiet young man who asked to play the piano for a meal, revealing slowly, piece by piece, the depth of his story through music. The next evening, the restaurant buzzed with quiet excitement. Word had spread that the young man who had played so beautifully in the previous nights might return. People who had already experienced his music were eager to hear more, while newcomers came in hoping to witness the remarkable performance they had heard about. The warm scent of food, the soft glow of the lamps, and the familiar setting of the restaurant created a cozy atmosphere. But tonight felt different. There was a sense of anticipation, a quiet tension in the air, as though something significant was about to happen. The young man entered, carrying only his small bag. He looked calm, composed, and a little more serious than before. He greeted the owner politely and asked if he could play. The owner, smiling, nodded. "Everyone is waiting for you. You're welcome to play." Patrons whispered among themselves, exchanging curious glances. There was a feeling that this performance might reveal more than music alone. He moved to the piano and began to play softly, letting the notes fill the restaurant with gentle, flowing melodies. But this time, the music carried a depth and intensity that was impossible to ignore. Each note seemed heavier, as if holding emotions that had been kept inside for a long time. Diners felt an immediate connection, sensing that the young man was not just playing music but expressing parts of his life through it. As he continued, a few subtle signs hinted that there was more to him than anyone had realized. The way he sometimes closed his eyes as if recalling memories, the slight tremble in his hands during certain notes, and the emotion that flowed from him suggested a story hidden beneath his quiet demeanor. The diners leaned forward, captivated as though they were witnessing a personal confession through the piano. After a few minutes, he paused. The silence in the room was profound, broken only by the soft hum of conversation that quickly fell quiet again. He looked around the restaurant, meeting the eyes of the diners. There was a seriousness in his gaze, a weight that made everyone lean in closer. For the first time, he spoke directly to the audience. "I want to share something with you," he said quietly but clearly. "What I have been playing is not just music. It is part of my life, my experiences, and the truth that I have kept hidden. I am not who you think I am. I am someone who has spent my life in the public eye, but tonight, I come to you simply as a person, not a celebrity, not a performer. Just a human being who wants to share a moment of music and honesty with you." The diners were stunned. Whispers spread through the restaurant as everyone tried to process what he had just said. Many were surprised, some in disbelief, and others in awe. They had been enjoying the music without realizing the extraordinary background of the man playing for them. He continued to play, but now every note seemed imbued with revelation. The music was no longer just sound. It was storytelling, confession, and connection all in one. Patrons felt a spectrum of emotions: surprise, admiration, empathy, and wonder. Even those who had initially come out of curiosity were now fully engaged, hanging on every note and word. "I have traveled under a different name," he admitted between pieces, his voice calm and steady. "I wanted to experience life without the expectations and attention that come with who I really am. I wanted to know what it feels like to be ordinary, to connect with people as equals, not as fans or spectators." Gasps echoed quietly around the room. Some diners exchanged looks of disbelief, struggling to imagine that the humble, gentle young man before them was a world-renowned pianist in disguise. The revelation added layers to everything they had witnessed in the previous nights: the humility, the sincerity, the emotion behind every note. He paused again, resting his hands lightly on the piano keys. "Music has always been my language," he continued. "It has allowed me to speak when words are not enough, to connect when barriers exist. Here, tonight, I can be myself, without pretense or expectation. And I am grateful to all of you for listening with open hearts, for being part of this experience with me." The room was silent, each person processing the truth. Some felt honored, others amazed, and many were quietly inspired. The young man's story transformed the music they had been hearing into something far deeper. It was not just about skill or performance, it was about humanity, honesty, and the courage to reveal oneself without fear. He resumed playing, the notes now carrying a mixture of relief, reflection, and joy. The music seemed lighter in parts, heavier in others, echoing the complex emotions of a life lived in public while seeking personal authenticity. Diners were captivated, tears forming in some eyes, smiles on others, and a sense of unity spreading through the room. They were no longer simply audience members. They were witnesses to a rare and intimate moment. Throughout the performance, the young man occasionally looked at individual diners, his eyes conveying gratitude and connection. He spoke softly, answering small questions when asked, but never revealing too much, letting the music remain the primary storyteller. Each piece carried meaning, and the audience felt it in a way that words alone could not convey. As the night progressed, the revelation settled into the minds of the diners. They had come to the restaurant expecting a performance, and instead, they experienced a human story, one of humility, authenticity, and extraordinary talent hidden behind an ordinary facade. Patrons reflected on how easily appearances can deceive, and how much depth a person can carry beneath the surface. When the final note lingered and faded, there was a moment of profound silence. Then the applause began, hesitant at first, then growing into a full, heartfelt ovation. Diners rose from their seats, clapping, cheering, and expressing their admiration. Some were moved to tears, overwhelmed by the honesty and artistry they had witnessed. The young man stood, nodded politely, and smiled faintly, acknowledging their appreciation without arrogance. He gathered his bag and approached the owner. "Thank you for allowing me to share this tonight," he said softly. "It means more than I can express." The owner, visibly touched, nodded.
"You're always welcome here."
"It has been an honor to have you." As he stepped out into the night, the restaurant remained in a state of awe. Patrons lingered, sharing their thoughts and feelings, reflecting on the music and the man behind it. They had been part of something rare and unforgettable, a moment where truth, humility, and talent converged to create an experience far beyond a simple performance. Even after he left, the conversation continued. Diners discussed not just the music, but the courage it took for someone of great fame to appear as an ordinary person, to reveal themselves without expectation, and to connect genuinely with strangers. They realized that the true gift he had shared was not only his skill on the piano, but the reminder that every person has a story, a depth and a humanity that often goes unseen. The owner closed the restaurant later that night, reflecting on the extraordinary events. He understood that what had happened was rare and precious, something that could not be replicated. The young man had shown that talent alone was not enough to inspire. It was honesty, humility, and human connection that left the deepest impression. The story of the pianist who asked to play for a meal and revealed a hidden truth would stay with everyone in that room for years to come. A quiet but powerful testament to the beauty of music and the courage to be oneself. The night after the revelation, the restaurant was quieter, but the atmosphere was still charged with the memory of the young man's music. People who had been present in the previous night spoke in hushed tones, recounting the melodies, the pauses, the emotions, and most of all, the honesty that had been shared. Newcomers entered the restaurant, having heard about the extraordinary pianist from friends and social media, curious to witness the magic for themselves. The owner, standing behind the counter, noticed the difference immediately. The restaurant now felt like more than just a place to eat. It had become a place where people came to experience connection and inspiration. That evening, the young man returned. There was no fanfare, no announcements. He entered quietly, carrying his small bag, and greeted the owner with a gentle nod. Patrons who had heard the story earlier looked at him with awe and curiosity, while new visitors watched quietly, unaware of the secret that had been revealed to the others. The young man moved to the piano, his calm presence drawing attention without demanding it. He began to play, softly at first, familiar melodies that instantly transported people to the previous nights, but soon the music deepened, carrying an emotional weight that reflected the journey he had shared with the diners. Each note was deliberate, every pause meaningful, as if he were speaking directly to the hearts of those listening. Patrons felt the honesty in his playing, the life experiences embedded in the melodies, and the sincerity that came from someone who had lived a story much larger than the restaurant itself. As the performance continued, the diners noticed subtle expressions in the young man's playing that seemed to reflect relief, contentment, and gratitude. The music told a story of someone who had spent a lifetime in the public eye, carrying expectations and scrutiny, and who now, in a quiet corner of a small restaurant, could be simply himself. Patrons were moved, some quietly wiping away tears, others nodding their heads as if understanding something profound about life. Between pieces, he spoke softly to the diners, sharing thoughts on music, life, and human connection. "Music allows us to communicate when words are not enough," he said. "It is not about fame or recognition. It is about the feeling, the sharing, and the honesty of the moment. Here with you all, I'm grateful to experience this without pretension, without expectation, just connection." His words were simple but powerful, resonating deeply with everyone present. Several diners approached him after small pauses, asking questions, sharing their admiration, and expressing how touched they had been by the music. He responded with humility, often deflecting praise and focusing on the shared experience rather than his own abilities. Each interaction reinforced the idea that he was not performing for recognition, but for the joy of connecting through music. People felt seen, valued, and inspired, as if the music had opened a space where honesty and humanity were celebrated. Throughout the evening, the young man alternated between lively, energetic pieces and reflective, introspective melodies. The shifts in tone mirrored the complexity of life itself: joy, struggle, reflection, hope, and understanding. Patrons responded naturally, some tapping their feet, others closing their eyes, and a few exchanging quiet smiles of shared emotion. The music had created a bond among everyone in the restaurant, an unspoken understanding that they were witnessing something rare and meaningful. As the performance progressed, a small child approached, captivated by the music. The young man smiled gently and played a soft, playful tune, drawing laughter and delight from the little one. Parents smiled, grateful for the lightness and warmth he brought to the moment. It was clear that he had an ability to reach people of all ages, creating a sense of inclusion and shared experience that went beyond skill. Later, he spoke briefly about the inspiration behind one of his pieces. "This melody is about hope," he said quietly. "It is about believing in something beyond ourselves, about finding light even in difficult moments. Music allows us to hold on to that hope, even if just for a few minutes." Patrons listened intently, feeling the depth and sincerity in his words, and many reflected silently on their own lives, finding comfort and encouragement in the shared experience. The evening continued with a series of performances, each one leaving a unique impression. Patrons were captivated, engaged, and emotionally connected. The young man had a way of making every note count, of ensuring that each melody carried meaning and impact. Conversations, laughter, and applause were interwoven with quiet reflection, creating a dynamic and human atmosphere that was both intimate and communal. As the night drew to a close, the young man played a final piece, a gentle, lingering melody that seemed to echo everything that had happened over the past nights. The notes floated through the room, delicate and emotional, leaving a lasting impression on everyone present. Patrons sat quietly, absorbing the final performance, feeling a sense of completion and fulfillment. It was more than music. It was a shared journey, a moment of honesty, and a celebration of connection. When the final note faded, there was a moment of profound silence. Then the room erupted in applause, cheers, and heartfelt expressions of gratitude. The young man stood, bowed slightly, and smiled faintly. He had shared his talent, his story, and his humanity, and the diners had responded with warmth and admiration. He gathered his bag, thanked the owner, and stepped outside into the cool night, leaving the restaurant filled with reflection, awe, and inspiration. Even after he left, the diners lingered, replaying the music in their minds, discussing the experience and reflecting on the impact of the evening. They realized that they had been part of something extraordinary, not just a performance, but a shared human experience. The young man had reminded them of the importance of connection, the power of honesty, and the beauty that can emerge when someone chooses to share themselves fully. The owner, closing the restaurant later that night, felt a deep sense of gratitude. He had witnessed something rare, a person who could bridge the gap between fame and humility, talent and humanity. He understood that the young man's visits had transformed the restaurant into more than a place for food. It had become a space for reflection, inspiration, and human connection. He knew that the story of the pianist who asked to play for a meal would be remembered for years, a testament to the power of music and the courage to be authentic. In the days that followed, patrons returned, often discussing the performances and the young man's story. Word spread further and more people came, hoping to witness a similar experience. The restaurant had gained a reputation not just for its food, but for the unexpected magic that could happen when someone shared their heart and talent freely. People realized that moments of beauty, honesty, and connection could happen anywhere, even in a small, quiet restaurant. The young man's story continued to inspire, not because of fame or recognition, but because of the simple truth he had shared. Music had been his language, his way of connecting with the world, and through it he had created a lasting impact on everyone who had listened. Patrons walked away with memories of melodies, emotions, and a renewed sense of empathy and understanding for others. Over time, the restaurant became a place where people came seeking more than food. They came for the experience, the chance to connect, and the hope of witnessing something meaningful. And though the young man did not come every night, his presence, music, and story left a lasting